Hello, you're all very welcome to Social Justice Ireland's annual policy conference. My name is Mick Clifford and I'm chairing today's conference, which is under the title The Challenges of Success Addressing Population Growth. And to introduce us to today's proceedings, we have the Director of Social Justice Ireland, Dr. Sean Healy.
So good morning, everybody, and you're more than welcome. And thanks for joining us again if you've been here before. And thanks for joining us if this is the first time you've been here or you've come to us. It's the 32nd iteration of this conference, which is kind of interesting. A couple of just the things to be careful about or to be aware of. We're not live streaming today's event, but we are recording it all, and it will be available on our website in due course, not immediately, but in due course. So if you don't want to be appearing in the videos or whatever, just indicate that to one of ourselves or one of the camera people, and we'll make sure that you're not in shots. Okay, just being conscious of that. It's now more than a decade since the crash of 2008, 2009. And the Great Recession that followed. Now, it's interesting that in the preceding decade before the crash, most economists and commentators praised the direction that Ireland was taking and praised the economic development that we had and praised what was happening in the society and so on. But obviously they were wrong, and the recession came and there was a huge crash. And then these same economists and commentators insisted that austerity was the cure. And they took their cue from the European Commission, which was taking its cue from the German government and the European Central Bank, which was more or less being run by the Germans. And the Troika, that was the IMF and the European Central Bank, together with the European Commission, they were imposing a particular approach, serious austerity. And again, their advice was taken, and again, it was wrong. And I think the point about that is that there was an awful lot of pain endured by an awful lot of people. Many jobs were lost that didn't have to be lost. There were huge reductions in services. People's incomes fell dramatically. A lot of people had to emigrate. Now, I'm not saying that all of that could have been avoided, but a great deal of it could have been avoided if we didn't have the imposition of an austerity approach that is now seen not to be the right way to have gone. Today, I think it's important there's a certain irony, just put this first, there's a certain irony that if you look at this morning's Irish Times, across the top of the first page, page 1, you have a headline that basically says the Germans accept that they got it wrong 10 years ago on Ireland, which I think is interesting. See that acknowledgement. It's interesting that they're acknowledging it. It's also better late than never, I suppose. But the problem is that a great many people suffered as a result of what in fact was a false analysis of what the situation was, and a false idea of what a pathway out of that situation might be, the best pathway might be. The interesting thing from Social Justice Ireland's point of view is that all through that time we argued for what is now seen as the correct analysis and what is now seen as the correct approach to having dealt with it. During that time, we met with the Troika 12 times in 3 years and argued with them about this and gave them a lot of documentation and so on, and had a certain amount of success, but not with the European Central Bank at all, and very little with the European Commission, a lot more with the IMF, but over a period of time it took quite a while. The interesting thing in that, of course, was that the public sector broadcaster, RTE, never covered the fact that we were having those meetings or that these were our positions, nor did the paper of record, the Irish Times. So it isn't a big surprise that they didn't lead their morning story by saying Social Justice Ireland vindicated, but that's another day's work. we wouldn't be looking for that really, you know, but just, I suppose what we'd be looking for is that they would accurately report the situation. And in many ways, that's what we're about. Why? I think we see ourselves at the moment in Ireland with nearly full employment, excellent economic growth, and so on. But we also see huge negatives. We have a huge problem in a two-tier health care system. We have problems in infrastructure, with housing, with broadband, with public transport. If you needed a test of the public transport, this morning was it, and it failed, full stop. We have huge problems on climate. And again, many of the same economists and commentators who were pontificating 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they're still at it. And with due respects to them, for the most part, much of what they're at is not good. It's not right, it's not accurate, and it's not good advice. What Ireland needs is there are a number of different things. We need accurate analysis. We need a commitment to a better future for all, not just for some. We need a commitment to travel the pathway towards a future that provides a better situation for all. And we need a commitment to good communication. And that's what this series of seminars or annual conferences have been about over the past 32 years. We've covered a great many topics, and we're in the same space today, our 32nd conference in the series, and we're looking at the challenges of success, addressing population growth in Ireland, as Mick said in the introduction. And the opening presentation is setting out a key outcome of Ireland's success. One of the successes we've had in the last decade is the fact that our population is growing dramatically. And that brings its own challenges, both because of what's happening with the young population and what's happening with the older population, and what the implications are for what we have in the middle as well. So we're glad that we're able to start today's conference by setting out the actual facts of the situation, and that we have James Hegarty from the CSO here to actually do that presentation for us. And I think I can hand over to him now.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, as Sean said there, my name is James Hegarty. I'm a demography statistician in the Central Statistics Office. Today I will talk to you about Ireland's changing demographic landscape. We will see how Ireland's population has grown since the 1841 census. We will examine current demographic and social trends to see how Ireland's demographic structure is likely to evolve towards 2051. I will focus on the younger and older age groups and hopefully provide some insights that will assist the group in their discussions without boring you too much with statistics. So, the area representing the Republic of Ireland registered a decline in population from just over 6.5 million in 1841 to 3.1 million in 1911. That was primarily due to the Great Famine in the 1840s and then outward migration as a result of that. The overall population level, which remained quite stable at just under 3 million between 1926 and 1951, declined further to reach a low point of 2.8 million in 1961. Then there was a decline in outward migration and a big increase in births in the 60s, 70s and 80s. And Ireland has also experienced strong population growth since the early 1990s, largely due to strong births and inward migration, with the result that the 2006 population of 4.24 million was 50% higher than the low point of 1961. Strong net inward migration since 2014, combined with a sustained natural increase, has resulted in the population climbing to 4.92 million in April 2019. This is the highest population recorded for Ireland since the 1851 census. So you can't just look at, growth in isolation, and that's just not the full story, I suppose, as Sean would be kind of saying as well. So Irish society has changed significantly during the past half century. We have, for example, become a mainly urban society. Census 2016 informed us that 63% of the population live in urban areas. The comparable figure in 1966 was 44%. Ireland has also become much more multicultural. In 1996, just over 53,000, or 1.5% of the census respondents, were born outside of Ireland. By 2016, this had increased to just under 540,000, or 11.3%. And Ireland has also seen significant gains in those achieving third-level qualifications. In 1991, 14% of males and 13.2% of females had received a third-level qualification. By 2016, 43% of women were educated at the third level, compared with 40.7% of men. In fact, the 1991 census was the last census to indicate a higher proportion of third-level qualifications among men compared to women, and women also tend to do actually better, in their studies as well. These gains in educational attainment have also coincided with increased labour force participation for women. So I suppose there are two, cultural and social advances that we have seen there. So we are also getting older. In 1981, the average age of Ireland's population was 31.3 years of age. In 2016, this had increased to 37.4 years of age. And the map shows the average age by electoral division, with higher average ages prevalent in the west of the country. The highest average age was both in Mayo and Kerry at 40.2 years of age, while Fingal, Kildare, Meath and South Dublin had the lowest average ages. And the graphic there is quite stark. You can kind of see the prevalence of the younger people on the east coast, and the west coast tends to be somewhat older. So I suppose all those things together then, they create another bit of a story. So like many countries experiencing increased levels of urbanisation, social change and ageing, Ireland has seen declines in both the volume of births and fertility rates. So in 2017, Ireland had just over 62,000 births. This is a substantial decrease from the recent high of 75,000 births recorded in 2010. The decline in fertility rates is even more dramatic. So in 1980, each woman of childbearing age would have 3.2 children on average over her childbearing years. By 2017, this had declined to 1.8. So you can see there, in 1980, even though there was a lot less women, there was a lot more births than there was in 2017. So the age at which women are having their first child is also rising year on year. In 1980, the average age at which women had their first child was 24.9 years of age. By 2017, this had risen to 31 years of age. The other interesting element of this graph, we can see that births dipped below 60,000 in 1987. And with births, for want of better language, there is an element of you reap what you sow. So the births from 30 years ago subsequently become, I suppose, the childbearing population for today. So you can kind of see there that births did dip below 60,000 in 1987 and didn't return to this level until 2002. And we will see later that this will impact on, the number of primary and secondary school children that we will have today. Okay. But I suppose even though our fertility rate has fallen from 3.2 in 1980 to 1.8 today, it still leaves us near the top of the EU table. So in 2016, Ireland's fertility rate ranks about 1.8, third in the EU behind France and Denmark, with France having the highest fertility rate of 1.9 in 2016. But I suppose, once again, that doesn't tell the full story. So the replacement rate would typically have been seen as a little more than 2. So over time, each man and each woman would have to be replaced by 2 and a little bit kids, to keep the population growing. So for the last 2 years, there has been more deaths than births in the EU 28 as a whole. Ireland is now a country that primarily experiences net inward migration. So Ireland has recorded net inward migration for 15 of the last 20 years. In the 20 years 1997 to 2016, 20,000 more persons on average, arrive to live in Ireland per annum, then left Ireland to live abroad. And that's a mix both of returning Irish nationals and then, first-time migrants from the EU and outside the EU. Since 2016, inward migration has exceeded outward migration by 30,000 per annum. And we've seen a new dynamic in recent years that it's primarily, our friends from outside the EU are our inward migrants for the last number of years. And just interesting there, in 2007, there was 151,000 inward migrants in that year alone. Now, we have already seen that Ireland's population is getting older. Since 1981, male life expectancy has increased by 7.7 years, and female life expectancy has increased by 9.2 years. The interesting thing we're seeing here actually is that men are actually closing the gap on women, and male life expectancy is increasing at a faster rate than that of women. It's not fully clear why that is, but it might be changing social conditions, and maybe men taking better care of their health might be some of the aspects as to why that's improving. So I suppose the question then is, why are all these things important? Why do they matter? So what the CSO do then, we look at all the past trends, social and demographic trends, and we use those then to try and glimpse into the future, and you look at what the population might look like, in 35 years' time. We look at aging, you look at births, you look at migration, and you try and paint a picture that would help policymakers like yourselves, to see what the needs might be going forward. So our expert group met in 2018 to project the population forward. So in truth, the only way the population can grow is by an increase of births over deaths or inward migrants over outward migrants. So basically, we came up with 3 net migration assumptions, a high, medium, and low, 2 fertility assumptions, and gentle increases in life expectancy, gentle gains. I will focus on the high migration, declining fertility scenario in M1F2, which best reflects recent trends. I sometimes find when I'm on about the M's and the F's, it turns people off. So all you need to really look at is M1 means net inward migration of 30,000 per annum. F2 means fertility declining from the current level of 1.8 to the European average of 1.6 by 2031 and maintaining at that level thereafter. And that's a reasonable assumption because as things currently stand, Ireland's population is somewhat younger than the European average, but we're probably aging somewhat towards those levels. And then gentle increases in life expectancy, male life expectancy to increase by 6.3 years, and female life expectancy to increase by 5 years. That's the most technical thing I think I'll talk about today, so that's that. So look, what do all those things mean? Where do they bring us? So basically, over the 35 years, based on the births that we saw 30 years ago, creating the number of women of childbearing age today, and the fertility rates that they will have. So we are seeing that, just wondering, births are projected to fall through to 2030 due both to declining fertility rates and the volume of women in the key childbearing ages, which we mentioned earlier, before rising thereafter. Deaths are projected to increase year on year as the population ages. So you can see under the M1F2 assumption, there will be a natural increase of births over deaths of 690,000 over the 35-year period. But what that also means is, whereas today there's about 30,000 more births than deaths, using this assumption in 2051, there would be about 9,000 more births than deaths by 2051. So that would be, an increase of 9,000 as opposed to 30,000 today. And then with the migration then of 30,000 per annum over 35 years, that leads to net inward migrants of 1,050,000 over the period. Add the 690,000 natural increase to that, And that gives us an increase of 1,740,000 persons to 2051, and an increase of about 1 million to 2036. And then I suppose this conference is about the young and the old. So it's not just looking at the total population, we have to look at how it impacts the different age groups. So how will it impact the young age group, the 0 to 14s? So Census 2016 showed us that there was just over 1 million persons aged 0 to 14, or 21.2% of the population. This is projected to decline from 2016 levels to just over 900,000 by 2036, and thereafter to increase again as the high births from 2010 on create more women of childbearing age, and that will lead to some increase in births. However, by 2051, the percentage of the population in the 0 to 14 age group will be substantially lower. So whereas it accounted for 21% in 2016, those in the 0 to 14 age group will account for about 15.4% by 2051. What this means in simple terms as well, that in 2016 there was 3 persons of working age for each dependent aged 0 to 14, and this is projected to rise to about 4 persons of working age for each dependent aged 0 to 14. And then I suppose, for anyone with primary and secondary school children, it's how do they play out for schools and the location of schools and things like that. So the number of primary school children is projected to decline from 548,000 in 2016 to 478,000 by 2036. This is due to the decline in the number of women in the key childbearing age groups and the falling fertility rates. Once again, this will recover from 2036 to reach about 540,000 by 2051. In the short term, I suppose this decline in primary school children you would expect it to primarily impact the greater Dublin area of Dublin and the Mid-East. In 2016, 42% of primary school children were in Dublin and the Mid-East, according to Census 2016. The number of secondary school pupils is projected, I suppose, to go the opposite way in the short term. So that is the high number of primary school children in the previous graph, the 500,000, as they come through to secondary school, they graduate to secondary school age. So the number of secondary school pupils is projected to increase by 75,700 from 369,900 in 2016 to just over 445,000 in 2026, as the relatively high number of births since 2007 worked their way through the system. Once again, the largest increases will be in the greater Dublin area, as the 42% of primary school children graduate on to secondary school. So I suppose that will become important. And just in terms then of the children being in the greater Dublin area, or a large percentage of them, and I suppose tenancy status has an impact on that. So if you look at this graphic here, I think it's quite interesting. So there's been remarkable changes in tenancy status since the 2006 census. So the age at which home ownership became the majority tenure category was 35 years in 2016. Prior to that age, more householders were renting rather than owning their home. In comparison, in previous censuses, the ages which marked the changeover between renting and home ownership were 32 years in 2011 and 28 years in 2006. Renting is the most common tenancy status among urban dwellers. So you can see there, 36% of urban dwellers are renting, and just 29% own their home outright. Whereas in rural areas, 48% of rural dwellers own their homes outright, with only 13% renting. So that renting element, and I suppose the lack of home ownership, that also impacts to some extent on the children, that we discussed previously. So Census 2016 shows noticeable changes in tenancy status for children, with the number of primary school children in rental accommodation increasing by 17.3%, with a corresponding increase of almost 19% for secondary school children. And it's even more stark, I suppose, if you see that, the types of accommodation that children are living in. So there was a 63% increase in the number of primary school children living in flats and apartments in the 2016 census, and a 46% increase for secondary school children. Now, granted, those figures are off a low base. Now, I suppose, if you were to see, I suppose, the Irish economy as a car, the working age population, those aged 15 to 64, they would be the engine, I suppose, that drives that car. So the working age population is primarily comprised of those aged 15 to 64. And this is the group that primarily drives economic growth and funds government spending. So in 2016, there were 3.1 million persons in this age category, equating to 65.5% of the total population of 4.7 million. While this size of the population will rise under all scenarios by 2051, its relative share of the population is set to decrease. Now, you can see from the slide as well, that decrease won't really take hold until after 2031. So that is an important element in terms of, I suppose, planning and putting appropriate policies in place. So the working age population will increase by 780,000 to 3.9 million by 2051, but its overall share of the population of 6.5 million will have declined in 2051 by 5.5 percentage points to just under 60%. And as I've said there, this decline in share is projected to primarily take hold after 2031. Now, perhaps the most significant demographic change facing Ireland towards 2051 is the increase in the older population. Census 2016 showed an increase of 102,000 persons, or 19.1%, in the 65 and over age group between 2011 and 2016. These increases are projected to continue, with the number of persons aged 65 plus reaching 1 million by 2031 and 1.6 million by 2051. So in 2016, those aged 65 and over accounted for 13.3% of the population. This is projected to reach 18.1% by 2031 and just under 25% by 2051. We have already mentioned the importance of the working age population with regards to creating the economic growth that facilitates government spending and policy implementation. So the older dependency ratio is a key measure. This expresses the population aged 65 years and over as a percentage of the population aged 15 to 64 years. This was 20.3% in 2016. All that means, actually, in simple terms, is for every person of age 65 and over, there was 5 people of working age. This is projected to be 3.5 people of working age relative to those aged 65 and over by 2031, and it's set to further decline to 2.5 persons of working age for every person aged 65 and over by 2051. The very old population, i.e. those aged 80 years of age and over, is set to rise even more dramatically. And I suppose a lot of that is due to the positive impact, I suppose, as Sean mentioned earlier, of healthcare getting better, life expectancy increasing, and those kind of things. So the very old population, i.e. those aged 80 years of age and over, is set to rise even more dramatically, increasing from just under 150,000 in 2016 to 549,000 by 2051, an increase of around 270%. So I suppose, what does that mean then, or what impacts that? So as the population of older persons increase, maintaining the health and well-being of that older population will pose challenges for policymakers like yourselves. With regards to health, Census 2016 shows us that while 87% of the total population describe their general health as good or very good, this declines to 67% for those aged 65 and over, and 51% for those aged 80 and over. So there will be challenges for policymakers around keeping the older population healthy, integrated with the community, and active. Census 2016 also shows us that around 1/3, or 49,000 of the 150,000 persons aged 80 plus lived on their own. This number is likely to increase substantially as the number of persons aged 80 plus climbs towards 550,000 by 2051. You can see again there, the older people tend to be older at the moment in the west of the country, and that's, and the kind of Midlands, and that's likely to continue. So if that metric of 1/3 was to continue, you would have around 180,000 persons aged 80 and over living on their own by 2051. But then if male and female life expectancy are to increase at the same rate, you may also have more couples living older and well together. But they're just elements that need to be considered. So why is living on your own important, or what is the impact of living on your own? So Census 2016 shows us that those living with others report better health. So 39.5% of persons aged 50 and over living in family households had very good health, compared with just over 27% for those living alone. So I suppose, there will be challenges there about, it may not always be living with someone, but it may be being integrated into the community or having someone, visiting you or things like that. So the population pyramid illustrates Ireland's changing population structure. It shows a fall in those aged 0 to 10 years of age by 2051, with increases projected across all other age groups. So you can see in 2016, the pyramid is kind of broad at the bottom, broad in the middle, and quite pointy at the top. Now that's set to change substantially by 2051, where you'll become kind of narrower at the middle, at the bottom, kind of stout in the middle, and actually you will have a significant bulk of the population near the top. So as I've said earlier, in 2016, 13.3% of the population were aged 65 and over. By 2051, those aged 65 and over are projected to account for just under 25% of the total population. Now, I suppose, what does this mean, or what do we look like compared to other countries? So I suppose Ireland and Cyprus are currently the youngest countries in the EU 28. In 2020, based on the Eurostat projections, Ireland is projected to be 4.5 years younger than the EU 28 average, 6.6 years younger than Germany, and over 8 years younger than Italy. In 2040, Ireland's median age, that means the age at which half the population are below it and half the population are above it. So in 2040, Ireland's median age is projected to be 41.5 years, which is still lower than the current EU 28 average. So Ireland should therefore have an opportunity to plan, I suppose, implement good policy and learn from the experiences of others. So just to summarize now what I've said, so Ireland expects, based on, I think, a fairly reasonable and robust projection, significant increases in population to 2051 of 1.7 million. Children will account for a lower percentage of the population. There will be an increased population in the older age groups. So whereas there's now 5 persons of working age for each person aged 65 and over, that would be expected to be about 2.5 persons for each person aged 65 and over by 2051. And the working age population will account for a reduced share of the total population. So when you add the two sets of dependents together, we've seen that the age group 0 to 14, they're set to decline as a share of the total population, and while those aged over 65 are set to increase substantially. So when you put those two together, one declining and one increasing, at the moment there are 2 persons of working age for each dependent 0 to 14 and 65 plus. By 2051, there will be less than 1.5 persons of working age for each dependent. But Ireland, as I've said, we're younger than most European countries. We will see the policies they implement, we will see the ones that work, we will see the ones that don't, and we will learn from the experiences of others, and the policymakers like yourselves can, I suppose, drive that forward and make your message heard. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, James. A fascinating insight into the future. I suppose there's a number of policy issues arise. Now, James doesn't want to address any specific policy issues, so we've Sean here as well for those. But questions, right? Any kind of questions, basically. We're wondering, people from the floor who might have any inquiries. Are we all being shy? We have a man down the back.
Sorry, I was just wondering, in terms of the statistics collected by the CSO, is there any possibility of establishing a compulsory applied statistics course for every politician entering Dáil Éireann? Because if we take the housing crisis and we see that there's a great incompetence in terms of facing the stark reality of the statistics, and I'm wondering, in terms of the ageing population and the serious complications that will arise, will we see more awareness of the CSO figures in terms of state policy?
No, thank you very much for the question. It would certainly be above my pay grade, but I will certainly bring it to my superiors. I think one thing we have done over the last number of years in the CSO, we have now increased, I suppose, our outreach substantially through the web and I suppose through publicising our data, and we're trying to get data out in little smaller bites and things like that can be accessed by all. So I know I recently did the population migration estimates and they were retweeted 77,000 times, and one of the retweets was by Leo Varadkar. So I do hope and I do think they are looking at the statistics, and then it will be for people like yourselves to guide them, I suppose, towards the best policy decisions that they can make.
I think it's I think it's very, very important that politicians and others involved in policy, in the officials in departments, but also people who are working in various parts of the society, are aware of and plugged into the real numbers, and are in some way engaged in a process of ongoing discussion around the implications of those changes. I think it's quite clear from James's presentation that there are dramatic changes coming, maybe at different paces for different parts of the society, but the implications for policy are dramatic. And I think, consequently, we should be engaging with them. And that's partly what Social Justice Ireland is at with conferences like this, where we're trying to put the data, if you like, the actual realities up on the table, and then spelling out, because the rest of the day we're going to be spelling out some of the implications of these numbers and what they might look like and what the implications for policy might be in the period ahead.
Yeah, we've one gentleman here and then Tony. Yeah, go on ahead.
Thank you very much. Fascinating set of figures, and it's frightening in many ways.
Could I just ask speakers, excuse me, my fault, could I just ask speakers to identify themselves when they're speaking, please, if possible?
Sorry. My name is Dave Quinn. Just to suggest to you, is it possible to put some context, or more nuanced context, to some of the figures? Because when you talk about dependents being aged 0 to 14 and 65 plus, my experience would be that there's not many 20-year-olds who wouldn't be dependent. So the definition of dependency might be more reflective of the current situation. Equally, on the other side, we know that the pensionable age is increasing over the next couple of years, and arguably what was a dependency or pensionable age of 65 in the past is creeping up closer to 70, and 70 is the new 50 now. So, at what stage do you introduce more nuanced or contexted reflection of the reality as it is now, and possibly what it will be in the near future as well, rather than the starkness of what we have, and without changing to the age categorization that you've defined here?
I think you raise an excellent point, and I think it's one that we've considered ourselves. So why they're the dependency ratios at the minute? They are I suppose, the European standard dependency ratios at the moment. Now, one of the things that we have done as part of the projections, everything is up there at single year of age. So, for each year of the projection, the data for males, females, totals is up there for single year of age. So the data is there for any policymaker in this room or outside it to, do alternative dependency ratios if they do so wish. There is, I suppose, one caveat though. We have seen, even though at the moment I suppose people can work to 65 and beyond it, there is still, a significant enough fall off at the age of 60 and over. So I think at the moment they will remain the standard European measures, but the option is there for anyone to look at alternative ones if they wish to do so.
And is that not very out of date, James, in terms of that being the standard European measures, in terms of education and longevity at the other end of the working life?
No, I suppose in terms of pension age, there's still a number of countries that have a pension age below that of 65. There's a number like ourselves now who are moving to a higher pension age, but I think it will take a number of years for the ratio to shift significantly. I think they're definitely at the younger age. I think you have a very valid point that there's very few 15-year-olds now going into the labour force. But I suppose that's why we have the data at single year of age that people can, work with it in any way they wish.
Tony here.
Tony Fahey from UCD. James, on your projections on the life expectancy end, the mortality end,
Yeah.
we know now there are some concerns in places like the United States and Britain that people maybe in teenage or middle age may well be the first generations in modern times who won't live as long as their parents. In other words, that a downturn in life expectancy is on the horizon. Is there any sign of that emerging in Ireland? And have any of your mortality assumptions for the future built in the shortening life expectancy rather than further increases in life expectancy?
That is another excellent point. No, I suppose our previous set of projections, we projected that, I suppose, male life expectancy would increase by 3% and female by 2.5%. The one prior to that, I think it was 3.5 and 3. So we're now down to male life expectancy increasing by 2.5% and female life expectancy increasing by 2%. So I suppose we have a number of experts in life expectancy that sit on the expert group. They know hundreds, I suppose, times more, I suppose, about the nuances of it than I do. So at the moment, we just go with one mortality projection, and I suppose we've done analysis around that. And even if you tweak, that significantly, it only adds in around 10,000 plus or minus to the population over a relatively long period. So we haven't factored in anything like a decrease in life expectancy yet, but then we do revisit the projections every 5 years. And over the last two sets, we have reduced the expected increases in life expectancy.
Lovely. Yeah, we've another gentleman here, please.
My name is Sean McDonough. In your presentation, you see that the jobs will be like what they were for the past 100 years. But the reality is a lot of people thinking of the fourth industrial revolution, that jobs won't be available. Like Moore's law tells us we double our capacity in terms of digital work by every 3 or 4 years. So that many people feel that even though people are well educated, there mightn't be jobs there for them. If, for example, in the driving, if self-drive cars come by in 10 years, or buses, a whole segment will fall out of the working reality. The same is true in retail. So I think this would be a major change to the kind of projections you presented during an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose my presentation here is primarily a demographic one. We didn't really factor into it what the future of work will look like. What we did factor in was we took, the proportions and the percentages of the population that are currently working across each of the age groups, and we, implemented, I suppose, very gentle increases into those age groups. We also factored in things like increased participation in third level, which may I suppose make that the young population, they may not be as many of them in the workplace, but I suppose primarily what we're looking at here is the cohort that are the working age population, and I suppose the future will play out then how many of those are actually working.
I think there's a very, very serious policy issue, Sean, that you're highlighting that needs much more attention than it's actually getting. Because there tends to be, in the policy process, an awful lot of people just basically dismiss the idea that there won't be jobs for everybody. It seems to me that there are two issues that need to be looked at quite closely. One is the fact of the number of jobs, whether there's actually going to be jobs for everybody. The second thing that needs to be looked at is the kind of jobs. Because if we're going to continue the current trend of sort of splitting the economy in a way that there's a huge growth in the number of low-paid jobs, that isn't a very viable future for large proportions of the population. And as population grows, there's all sorts of implications there. So it seems to me that it isn't just touching the future of jobs or the future of work, because if we are facing an alternative future where there aren't jobs for everybody in the way that they are today, which is a relatively new thing historically, it's only a century and a half or whatever, we are then also having to look at income distribution systems, which is looking at a situation where people who may have work but don't have a paid job, they have loads of work to do but they don't have a paid job, they need an income support system. And that's why Social Justice Ireland has been very strong in its advocacy of basic income as an approach. Not because we're ideologically tied to it, but we see it as the most viable option into the future. And we've done a lot of work on that. But you're spot on in terms of a key issue that needs to be addressed as a result of the changes that are emerging.
Yeah, with somebody here.
Thanks very much. Karen Murphy from the Irish Council for Social Housing, and excellent presentation, really enjoyed it, thanks very much. I think my question arising from it is probably best directed at Sean, because you want to stay away from policy matters. But just looking at those demographic trends, there seems to be a shift is going to be required in our entire social policy model. There's housing implications, work, pensions, our care model. So I suppose, Sean, how are we going to achieve this, and what are the priorities, or what should we be focusing primarily on?
Thanks for the easy question, Curtin. One of my favourite questions at the same time, though. It's one of the issues I think that the society needs to look at much more closely. We are in a situation where there is a need to look again much more closely at how at what level of services are required, what level, like services in health and education, and caring and childcare and so on. Also, we need to look much more closely at the level of infrastructure that we require, like housing, public transport, broadband, things of that nature. And I think my own concern would be that there isn't sufficient, anything remotely close to sufficient discussion on that. And I also would be concerned that there are great swathes of the society that are not involved in that discussion, and their views are not being taken into account. The danger with that is that we then go along with a small number of people who might be considered experts, and I think you might have heard in my introduction that I have issues around some experts that we have been listening to for the last 20 or 30 years, and what they have recommended and how they haven't worked and how people have suffered as a result and how they still continue holding forth and being cited and being the go-to people for advice. So I think we need huge changes. Basically, I think what we need is a model that recognizes sustainability as key, that recognizes at the same time that you need a thriving economy, but it has to be sustainable. It can't be just generating growth like the way we've been doing it in the past. Not just Ireland, this is the world. But we also then need decent infrastructure and services. We need just taxation, and we need real participation. Like the governance issue needs to be seriously looked at, because I think an awful lot of people feel they're not heard, and as a result of that, a lot of people are hitting out at society across the world today. So there's like basically 5 components to that, if you like, and they all need to be looked at. Why? Because they need to be dealt with together in an integrated way. And in one of the things that I would see as urgently required when I see these kinds of numbers that James has been setting out for us, we have serious changes coming in Ireland. The sheer scale of the population, if it grows, and the aging of the population, and when you see a population of over 65 going from 600,000 to 1.6 million, it's gone up a million between now and 2051. That might sound an awful long time, but it actually isn't. It's only 30 plus years. And taking the point that David made earlier on, that they're going to be able to look after themselves for longer and all sorts of things of that nature, we still have a situation of dramatic change. So the whole infrastructure and services area, the whole issue of just taxation in that, the whole issue of real participation, and generating a viable economy, a thriving economy in that, but making sure that absolutely everything you do is sustainable in the long run. So climate and all these things have to be part of it. Not just climate, because it has to be socially sustainable, economically sustainable, and sort of environmentally sustainable. So huge challenge, and I think these are the kinds of issues we need to be paying a lot more attention to.
Okay, yeah, we're nearly at time. We've time for one more. We've one gentleman here.
Francis Gilmartin, County Leitrim, PPN. Just listening to and looking at all that's up there and that, people getting older, okay? People needing more healthcare, as Dr. Sean mentioned healthcare, and he mentioned schools, right? Education. Until somebody decides a mechanism of getting back our nurses, our doctors, and our teachers to be here for the people of Ireland, then we have a problem. And it's a problem that's, looking at the figures there, it's a problem that's going to have to be dealt with, especially the older the population gets, the more medical care you need. And you haven't the medical care here, you have it in my own family, you have it in Abu Dhabi, you have it in America, you have it everywhere, you haven't it here. And someone wants to ask the hard questions, is why is the people not staying in Ireland to work? Thank you.
That's grand. Thank you very much for that. James, one quick thing that just occurs to me in terms of the stats. The figures you've there for net inward migration, 20 to 30,000, would I be correct that the vast majority of those would be contributing to the working age cohort, and therefore contributing from that, bumping that up compared to those who are dependent?
You would be correct in saying that. So primarily, inward migrants tend to be, the vast majority in the age group 15 to 44, and they tend to have the same labour force participation, if not somewhat higher than, I suppose, the population that's already here. Now, it's important to note as well that when we talk about inward migrants, it's not, just, EU citizens and non-EU, it's also returning Irish migrants as well. But yeah, certainly there is strong labour force participation amongst inward migrants, and they are certainly primarily in the younger age groups.
Great. James Hegarty, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. I think that sets a perfect context for the rest of the discussion we're going to have today. In the most immediate instance, we're going to have a cup of coffee, I think, and if everybody could be back here, please, promptly at 11:30. Thank you very much.